Molo Sambonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, shalom, good people. Welcome to Liberty and Friends, your Sunday night news wrap-up show here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sikle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Do I not have a very interesting show for you tonight, as we also rope in a lot of international news. So welcome to it. Get yourself a warm beverage, whether it's iets om te suip or iets om te drink. Those of you who are Afrikaans will know exactly what I mean by that subtle difference. But welcome to it. It is Liberty and Friends. I have my panel waiting in the background. I see also my my fifth guest also joining us. As I said, you're watching Liberty and Friends. Remember, your only price of admission tonight is to hit that like button. Hit that like button. It helps get the show out and about. And if you can, share the link, whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Tonight on Liberty and Friends, we look at the collapse of the state of affairs out in Afghanistan at the moment. I've got a special guest who will help us unpack that. He's, of course, a retired U.S. Army vet. But I'll get into all of that in a moment. The other issue we'll look at on that international front is the elections out in Zambia. Hashtag if they can do it, what stops us? So we'll cover those sort of issues also tonight, looking in detail as to what is happening in Zambia, of course, and the implications for us as South Africans. If other African nations can host elections, as I said, hashtag why not us? On the other areas that we'll look at tonight is, your president. He appeared before the Zondo Commission today, this week, in a performance which just beggars belief. But we'll unpack that tonight with our panelists. Speaking about those panelists, let me start introducing them from let's see here, the closest to me is Koketso Resane, who of course is one part of the trio out at the Manpatria podcast. There he is on screen. Koketso, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Big Daddy. Good evening to everyone else. It is cold out here. I don't know about you. This is actually a reminder that I need to do the right thing and get married so I can stop freezing in bed every evening.
Shout out to Koketso, man, bringing that perspective up in here. And he's right, by the way. It is freezing here in Cape Town, too. Welcome to it, Koketso. Next on my little panel here is Tariq Khan, of course. Tariq Khan, who's with the Freedom Advocacy Network. There he is. Tariq, good evening and welcome to Liberty and Friends.
Hi, this is Koketso. Thanks for having me on the show tonight. Hi to the viewers as well. It's good to see everyone again.
Excellent. That is Tariq Khan, of course, with the Freedom Advocacy Network. Make sure you check them out at fan.net. But if I'm wrong on that, I'll clarify a bit later. They're doing excellent work, excellent advocacy work. Next on my list here, I have a familiar face, a chap, of course, who's part of the Daily Friend publication. That's www.dailyfriend.co.za. I'm talking, of course, about Marius Roodt. There he is on screen. Marius, good evening. Welcome to LNF.
Sikle, thanks for having me. How's it to Koketso and Tariq as well? And to the listeners and viewers, obviously.
Excellent. Welcome to it. Speaking about another firm favorite, someone who is beloved on this channel. We used to work very closely together on a podcast, that she does for the Daily Friend on Chai FM, syndicated on Chai FM. Sara, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations. Sara, good evening.
Evening. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone.
Excellento. That is Sara Gunn. Last but not least, the head honcho himself out at the Chris White Africa show, which I really encourage you to search up, please, online and subscribe. Smash that subscribe button, especially because he at one stage was deplatformed. I'll let him talk about that briefly and how he's roared back into our small screens. Chris White, good evening and welcome to Liberty and friend.
Hey, Celia, I don't know if roared back's the right answer, but definitely came back, that's for sure. Took a look and it kept on ticking. But greetings to everybody. And Koketso, my brother, you sound a little desperate there. You want to go out to the club occasionally, but make sure you're wearing a face covering because, you know, it's not safe without one. Just so you know about that. In case anybody's wondering, to answer the question straight up, I am colored. I'm pink, and you can see that very clearly from what the sun did to my face at 4,300 meters yesterday at Pikes Peak, 14,400 feet yesterday.
Well, welcome to it. We do enjoy a little color on the show, but at the same time, we don't care about color at the same time. Welcome to it, guys. Really good to have you all on here. You know, where Chris is enjoying summer, we are freezing our asses off here in South Africa, but hopefully we can warm things up tonight. Chris, and let me actually begin with you because I'm going to look at, you know, what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment, where the Taliban, a foe that the US has literally been waging a war against terror against for the last 20 years, is back by all, seemingly by all accounts, back in control in Afghanistan after your president, Chris, had told reporters in a rather very confident way, there's absolutely no chance of a Taliban takeover. Chris, your thoughts?
When you say my president, are you referring to the Manchurian cadaver? Is that the president you're referring to? Just thought I'd ask that. Yeah. Well, the Manchurian cadaver was part of administration that had 8 years to wrap up this conflict when there was actually an optimal time to do this, if ever there was such a thing. The whole thing is very frustrating. Got a lot of brothers and sisters in arms who've lost body parts, have traumatic brain injury, those who didn't come back alive, missing testicles, not to mention the carnage inflicted on Afghanis. It's, you know, it's, as a historian of political science, it's very frustrating because you can see the handwriting on the wall for this sort of thing. I mean, all you have to do is go back to Alexander the Great. If that's not good enough for you, go to the Brits for a century. If that's not good enough for you, look at an almost contemporary experience with the Soviets. And that's not to say that we couldn't accomplish things in Afghanistan. In fact, we did. In the first 18 months, we accomplished everything we set out to do. The problem from my perspective as a strategic planner and somebody that's done that sort of thing is that there didn't seem to be a clear strategic plan for what the end state was in Afghanistan. So what you're seeing today is what I call the Saigon scenario. This is incredibly embarrassing. This is even more embarrassing that this brain dead, delusional, demented clown who's president. It's even more embarrassing than that is this is just like Saigon 1975 all over again. This is horrific. You know, we just took these soldiers out. Now we're putting Marines in there to evacuate the embassy. Having worked at a dozen U.S. embassies around the world, well, more than that, and worked at 8 in Africa, it's just, it's embarrassing beyond belief. Now he's going to blame it on Trump. Trump deserves a little blame, I suppose, because he didn't change their strategic vision. But Biden's a guy that announced his withdrawal date and then took troops out and made it publicly known. The Taliban never went away. They just went to Pakistan. And that's part of our problem. The fact that they were in Pakistan the whole time and we had problems with our Pakistani allies is part of this. We give Pakistan almost more money for defense than any other country in the world except for Israel and Egypt. And what do we get for it? This. Afghanistan is on the verge of collapse and there's nothing we can do to save it short of sending 3 U.S. divisions in tomorrow.
Again, that Saigon mental image
scenario
comparison you're making, Chris, is absolutely apt. In fact, let me put an image that's sort of floating on social media at the moment. You know, the Chinooks, the famous image of the U.S. military might of you know, your ability to deploy troops very quickly. In this instance, that same helicopter used to try and extract U.S. personnel from, in the top image, Saigon embassy, surrounded, of course, by the North Vietnamese, and below, an almost repeat of history, this time in Afghanistan. Chris, before I move to my other panelists, talk to me about that, the sentiment, the mood as you pick it up in America right now on the ground. Perhaps begin here for us in sort of left-wing media outlets. What are they saying about what's happening right now? And of course, in the sort of more right-wing Fox News et al., what are they sort of saying about what's happening in Afghanistan and the geopolitics of it all?
Well, you've kind of caught me at a disadvantage for once. It's rare that I'm not up on what the broadcasts are putting out there, but I haven't watched any of them this week because my service in the hotels I've been staying out of here was rather poor, so I had a hard time watching the news. But But talking to people on the ground, of course, I'm in Colorado Springs, which is where Space Force is headquartered. That's where I stayed at. I stayed at Space Force the last few days. And then we have Fort Carson here in the Air Force Academy. So massive military, retired military presence here. Huge. This is a town that 30 years ago had 200,000 people. It has 448,000 today. It's growing by leaps and bounds. And a lot of those are tied to the defense industry. People are very, very angry. Those on the left, on the right, and the center, people are very angry about what's happening and very embarrassed. Of course, there's a segment of our society that rejoices in this. It's the same sort of sickos who are rejoicing about our census figures. It's really bad in so many ways, and not just because America's humbled and humiliated. We get humbled and humiliated all the time. It's not easy, or it's not difficult to humble a giant. You just got to hit him in the heel in the right spot. But the reality is that this was eminently preventable. It was eminently predictable. It was predicted repeatedly by analysts, by policymakers, by people, and that doesn't matter. This is perfect proof that politics trumps everything, not reality. I mean, there's no reason whatsoever to continue the ANC's foolish BEE policies, which is destroying South Africa, but they do it anyway because it profits their patronage network. And there's no reason to withdraw from Afghanistan in this fashion, other than Joe Biden wants to put a little notch on his belt and go, look, I said I was going to withdraw by September 11th, and we're doing it. It's ridiculous. Obama tried this nonsense with Iraq. It failed miserably, and it cost us many more lives, Iraqis and Americans and Iranians who were coming across the border, should have been there. And then they reversed course, and they sorted it out, and then they just ran away from Iraq. We're lucky Iraq hasn't turned into what Afghanistan's going to be here shortly. Yeah, the news, I can get you more update as I go back and look at the news later this week, but I haven't really paid attention to them. I've just been talking to people and analysts and people I know in the defense community who've been calling me and talking about this. It's frustrating because you know what's going to happen. At the same time, we've got record numbers of people illegally invading our country from the south, and they're just coming across the border unconstrained. It's ridiculous. It's just, I don't know what to say, Sile. It's very disappointing. Very disappointing.
Absolutely. I mean, I can echo that sentiment. Just I'll throw it to the rest of the gang now. You know, because again, one cannot prosecute the issue of why the US was there that long, and I mean that's irrelevant now. What should have been the issue that all policymakers on both sides of the aisle, and it's debatable these days as to whether there is a difference anymore between the two sides, but in any event, what is definitely debatable is whether, as you said, the policy on how the US withdraws and whether it invested enough in developing the local forces, which again, in my view, should never been what the US military is used for in the first place, insofar as nation building. But again, that's another debate around the why the forces were there for as long as they were. I want to read something very quickly before I throw it to the rest of the panel. I just had a piece I thought very interesting by Ben Farmer, who is a correspondent out for the Telegraph in Kabul. Let me just get to my quote here. Pardon me, guys. Give me a second. You know, where he concludes the following. He says, open quote, and ultimately, I think we tried to make this our war, not theirs, he says. This is him quoting a particular military leader. And he continues to say that we deployed 100,000 coalition soldiers to fight the war in the early days, supported by small numbers of Afghan security forces. Totally the wrong approach, he says. We should have invested in Afghan forces with and through them. The failure to build an Afghan, building Iraqi, Libyan and Syrian forces, he said. And the final quote is, our track record of building indigenous forces in the last 20 years hasn't been good. I don't know the answer, he says, but I suspect one of our failings is that we insist on building them in our likeness. I've always thought that's a potentially inappropriate model. And
Sile, before you run off, let me comment on that really quickly, because first off, having built an army in this fashion, they're talking about being responsible for the reconstruction of the Armed Forces Liberia. I ran that program. I built that army. Now I have people that work for me. I didn't build it by myself, but it's a very apropos example. And I disagree with some of the commentary. Specifically, it is appropriate for the U.S. military and for the Brits and for the Russians and Chinese, if they want, to help indigenous forces build their capability, as long as they're doing it in a proper fashion that benefits that host nation. Now, we've got examples. The problem is they don't pay attention to examples. Liberia is a perfect example. The Armed Forces of Liberia have been a force for good since we built them. They have done peacekeeping in Mali. They've done peacekeeping in Darfur. They assisted in the Ebola crisis. They were essential for that. They've built schools and clinics. They've been a force for good despite being underfunded. That's one example. But the issue is this, I do agree with the gentleman that wrote that, Farmer, is that we try to make these forces look like our forces. Now, in the case of Liberia, they think they're Americans. That's just the Liberian psyche. So they want to look like the American army. So that was the standard they already had. So we just, we went with that, and then that works for them. But it doesn't work in Afghanistan. You can't force your culture, your style onto other people. It just doesn't work. And that's the big mistake that we made here. While I was doing what I was doing in Liberia with a few hundred people, they were using 15,000 people in Afghanistan to train 180,000 soldiers to be like U.S. Army soldiers. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that's the problem we have here. But it doesn't matter how many trillions of dollars you put into building militaries. If the will isn't there, if the desire isn't there, it isn't going to pay off. And that's ultimately what happens. That's what happened in South Vietnam. There was no will. The army, we spent hundreds of millions of dollars building an incredibly large army, incredibly well equipped, and all that equipment was just because guys just dropped their weapons and ran. They just ran at the first sign that they came in contact. So anyway, so I agree with most of what the guy said, but the point about us not doing it, I disagree with that. But definitely the point that that we trying to make other people look like us, that's not a good way to do business. It doesn't succeed. Sorry, I just want to make sure I address that.
No, absolutely. And again, your views is a pro here, because again, let me throw it back to you, Sara, because I look at what's happening over there, and I think to myself, this is, insofar as Chris's point, which I think is one of a rule of law, that if you're going to set up shop in a country, you go to war, rightly in my view, against terror forces which struck the US, where I still hold a view is that, staying as long as they did created this environment, unfortunately, where they had to think long and hard around what pulling out actually looks like. And I think this is where we're seeing a failure of policy right now. I would never want to pin it on, a Republican or a Democrat government. Really, we're seeing a failure of thinking clearly around how you pull out, having then at least left the tools for the establishment and preservation of law and order, and of course the rule of law in that society. It does seem to be a failure of that in particular. Sara?
Yeah, one of the things that concerns me, and I've saw it as well in an article by a ex-British military, is that what terrifies me about the West when it goes into military adventures, is that they don't learn from history. They don't. I mean, he was complaining about the fact that the politicians were not speaking to the military. There was very little understanding of the culture. No one spoke the language. There's been a tendency, I think, in the West generally to approach other areas of the world from our paradigm, not from their paradigm. And I think that ensures that you're there for 20 years and you don't leave a legacy that's helpful. And I mean, I won't go into any more than that, but that's probably the greatest fault in the West, is to assume that the paradigm, in particular in a place like broadly the Middle East, is our paradigm, and it's not at all. And I think I don't think in much of the West has covered itself in glory.
Oh, sorry, I would have missed a bit of what you said. I saw some viewer feedback about the quality of my line. I've just switched to my Wi-Fi. I hope I am more audible and more stable.
Much better.
And perhaps let me move that conversation along. Marius, I'm going to come to you perhaps. And I don't want to dwell too long on this issue, but there is something to be said here, guys. Around on the one hand, it is critically important that once you establish something and it becomes a bit of a mess, let's be frank here, people. It becomes a bit of a mess. You do have that responsibility to make sure that when you step back from it, you leave people better off. I just read a tweet earlier this morning, which really upset me. A lot of these chaps who are assisting U.S. forces in Afghanistan, with either translations or, local logistics, whatever the case may be, now being systematically targeted by the advancing Taliban in Kabul and being executed out in the streets of Kabul. Guys, surely the U.S. would have a responsibility to these guys who help them out there.
Yeah, I
Marius?
think I think they do have a responsibility for them to them, but I do see that the US has been giving additional visas to Afghanistani citizens that were involved with helping them, I believe. And I see that the UK is also going to be giving student visas to people from Afghanistan, apparently more than they normally do. So, but I think this is obviously an issue where the US. I mean, they pulled out without. I mean, Chris obviously covered it much better than I did. He obviously knows so he's got a much better knowledge of it. But it's also just crazy how history repeats itself. I mean, you're talking about the Chinook helicopters taking people out of Saigon, and they're doing the same in Kabul now. And also how, I mean, it's a graveyard of empires. I mean, just about every empire that's pulled out of Afghanistan, then a couple of years later, then it's gone. I mean, I think Chris also touched that. I mean, you can go back, the Ottomans, the British, the Soviet Empire, now the American Empire. And I just think that the way that the Americans pulled out, I do think it's disgraceful. And as you said, there's people getting killed now because of they were helping the Americans. And there was also a video I saw of a young Afghanistani girl, and she's about 13, 14. And she was crying and saying, she's so worried for her future now with the Taliban coming and taking over the country again. So, yeah, it's pretty scary, and I feel sorry for Afghanistanis, and I think the American government has acted disgracefully in this.
And Koketso, let me bring it to you, riding off of exactly what Marius has just said now. RIP to Afghani women and women's rights, or just even human rights in that part of the world now. A crafty, snake in the grass opponent like the Taliban always knew that half of the game is just waiting it out, biding their time, and as soon as there's a little bit of a showing of weakness by the US, they'll move in, and we're seeing that, are we not?
Yeah, definitely. So one has to say that it's very fortuitous that all of this is happening right now. I strongly believe that the Taliban were always waiting in the wings, pretty much waiting for Biden to be as inept as he is at this point in time. I believe they were strongly waiting for him. And I forgot which book I read this in, but the part of the reason the American military has been so effective in peacekeeping, at the very least, is that there's always that credible threat of war. There's always a very credible threat that if you step out of line, they have the biggest guns and they will come in and punish you. With Biden in particular, it doesn't seem that way. And the bad guys, be it criminals, terrorists, they're going to take advantage of that, knowing very well that President Biden is not going to do much to alleviate the situation. And really, at the end of the day, the biggest losers here are the Afghan citizens. If we look at the capital, Kabul, there, population was skyrocketing in there because, US presence was kind of giving people a safety net of some sort. And they knew in their hearts that this was a safe place to be. And if the worst comes to pass, they have some semblance of protection. That protection is gone now. Embassies are evacuating all of their staff, it's not a good picture, and it takes away that safety net that people have been looking at. But I have to squarely blame this on the Biden administration for showing weakness. And had it been anyone else, just as it had been in the past, I don't think we'd be seeing what we're seeing today.
And Tariq, maybe I'll have you end it off. And Chris, I will come back to you because there's one more question I wanted to chew on this issue, because it has such implications. And you'll have to pardon me because I'm really becoming angry now as I think about the very people that Koketso talks about, who for a brief moment in their existence, thought, you know what, we've actually escaped an evil system. We've escaped something that has perverted their religion, for instance, in order to create the type of society which is a hell on earth, an absolute hell on earth. And now we're seeing an almost rebounding of that radical Islamic terrorist ideology, finding roots in places like the Afghanistan, pockets of Iraq, of course, an Iranian regime which might look at this also and think, you know what, this is the kind of stuff we want, a destabilized region, which is a threat, by the way, to not only Israel, because I know people are going, there he is again, he's about to build his pro-Israeli stance, but even to Muslim countries in that area who want to get on with, existing in peace, enjoying economic prosperity, and lifting that region up. Those countries, both Muslim and Jewish and Christian lives and whatever religion lives in that part of the world, are facing the risk again of a terror group who really has no care for human lives. Tariq, I'm going to throw it to you in this context. There's an image I saw, because I want to prosecute this issue a little bit more, just to tell you how things are changing very quickly in that part of the world. Already, there's some shop fronts. There's an image that sort of went viral of a shop front where the man was painting over images of, female models, like whatever they were modeling. Could be lipstick or, a hijab, whatever. But they're already painting over, a public display of a woman's image in that country. I mean, if you are someone who is in either any minority in that part of the world or a grouping which doesn't have much say politically in the area, the Taliban coming back is just a devastating thought to you, is it not? Tariq, you're just muted. Let me just unmute you.
I think that it is a very devastating thought to have, especially when you look at the way that it's going to affect women. I think it's so hypocritical for Joe Biden to position himself as this progressive president, where when it comes to foreign policy, he actually made a decision that's going to help the Taliban to come back to power. I think the US really does have a strong military, and as someone touched on earlier, its strength lies in its ability to intimidate people who threaten it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And let me come to you, Chris, as I said, in that final question, and I want to rope in Heather B's question. Shout out to you, Heather B, for watching. Why did the Afghan army just give up and run effectively? This seems to have happened so quickly and almost even orchestrated. And there's another question here by Tanya Edwards. Again, this is a cynicism that I actually do value. Can you please tell us when Afghanistan was ever a free country? Chris, just your final thoughts.
Well, I don't think you can ever point to a point in history. Maybe little fiefdoms inside it was relatively free, but yeah, the question is why did the Afghan army just collapse like this? Well, first off, when you see someone blown apart or shot or killed in front of you, it's a pretty stark reality. If you've ever served in combat, and unfortunately I've served in combat, it's not a pleasant thing. So that affects people. And the Taliban has been seeing this for years. Even if they've got new fighters, they've got experienced veterans who are accustomed to this, and it's part of their ethos and their psyche. So they handle it better than raw recruits in a conscription army do. The will is the bottom line. That's the bottom line will. One of the reasons why America's military has been so successful since 1973 is we've not been a conscript army. We've been a professional military. And as a consequence, these are volunteers who are well compensated. I mean, they're not wealthy, but they're well compensated compared to many other affectations. And they build an ethos where this is about team and it's about honor, about country. And that ethos is not in the Afghan military. You can't force that. You can try to inculcate it, but you can't force it if the will is not there. And it all comes down to will. The Afghanis don't have the will to defend their country, and they're afraid. And so the same thing happened in Vietnam. It's exactly the same thing. They didn't have, as long as the Americans were there, they had the will to fight because they knew that they wouldn't be slaughtered. But now they have no confidence in themselves. That just shows a strategic failing and an operational failing of building this military. Let me give you a real quick parallel to this in Africa, just very quickly before we move on. And that's Mali. For 10 years, I listened to the State Department crow about, now I've never been stationed in Mali, but I've been in Niger. I was stationed in Niger and Mauritania, so I bookended on both sides. But Mali, for 10 years, I listened to the State Department go, look at this. This is a paragon of democracy. They have elections, and it's so wonderful. And then the Department of Defense would say, that's a professional military. We've been training them. They're amazing. And I said, are you people smoking crack cocaine? There's two problems with this. Number one, it's not a democracy. That government at best represents 17% of the population concentrated in a small geographic portion of the southern portion of the country. They don't represent the country. Just like the ANC doesn't represent South Africans. It represents cadres. That's who it represents. They represented an ethnic group, a little bit different than the ANC. So that's the first problem. So it wasn't democracy. That's just a ludicrous thing to begin with. Just because they won elections doesn't mean it's a democratic and free society. And the second thing is with the military, because you've done several exercises with one special forces unit and they can manage to hold their rifles, point them in the correct direction on the range, fire them, recover the brass, and hit the targets, that doesn't mean you have a professional military. When they sent the Malian armed forces to fight Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, they went to Timbuktu. Timbuktu, the Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb showed up that day they arrived in Timbuktu with vehicles and crew serve weapons, and they had body armor that was stenciled in English. Islamic Police of Timbuktu and in Arabic on the back. Now, that's a serious foe that's prepared and is dedicated to what they're doing. Meanwhile, the Malian forces were sent forth where half the troops had no weapons. The troops who had weapons, most of them had no ammunition. It also carried an empty weapon. It had no water buffaloes to provide water, no rations, no fuel. They were on foot, and they had no air support. No wonder Mali fell apart and why they turned and they actually had a coup against the president 3 weeks before an election. So the parallel is there to show how when there's no will, things just fall apart. And in Afghanistan, you know, there's a lot of reasons why there's no will, but I think the biggest part for the Afghani soldiers is terror. They're terrified. The terror is working. They know that if they lose, it's all over for them, for their families, everything. So they'd rather just disappear, drop their guns, and run into the woodwork. And I think that's why they've melted so quickly. They were never the force that we paid for. We paid $100 billion for professional military that does not exist in Afghanistan. Case closed.
Absolutely. And that's just the bottom line. And I'm sorry, I did say this would be the last comment, but there's two nice questions that came through, one of which is still on screen. Before I get to those questions, welcome to it. You're watching Liberty and Friends. We've just hit that 30 minutes mark on the show, but I'm looking at my engagement, guys. It's nowhere near where it should be. Get those likes up, people. Hit that like button, especially if you're liking the content on here tonight. Get my likes up, people. I want to see those likes screaming in an upward direction. You're getting commentary here that you're not getting it on the mainstream media. Come on now, hit that like button, folks. I've got Chris Wyatt in the house of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. Make sure you check him out on his YouTube channel. It is back. I will say it's roaring back. But I've got Koketso Resane, 1/3 of the Manpatria podcast trio. Shout out to Koketso. He's right there on screen. Sara, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations. Tariq Khan, there he is, fixing his hair, from the Freedom Advocacy Network. And of course, last but not least, Marius Roodt from the Daily Friend. Chris, I just wanted to tap into these two questions, then we'll move on. The first question is a little earlier on related to, and I'm sorry to the viewer, I couldn't read your name, it was in just Russian. But, the question was basically, what about these sort of private military options? He mentioned one, it wasn't Blackwater, he mentioned executive outcomes. Is that a solution that could maybe be a stopgap? I know the Afghan government has collapsed, and I mean, the president has fled, but let's hypothetically say he was still around, he was in the fight, so to speak, but just didn't have his own armed forces. Could they reach out at this point to something like that? As the first question. Then as a second question, an associated question, because South Africa is also dealing, or the Southern African countries are dealing with a terror threat just across the border from us in Mozambique, the parallels between what we're seeing there and perhaps in our own case.
I'll try to go very quickly. The first question about private military corporations, PMCs, not a solution. It's too late. If this was falling apart over 6 or 8 weeks, maybe. But in a matter of 3 or 4 days, the whole country collapsing, it's going to be too late. There's nothing they can really do other than save a few lives. That's the best they can hope to do. But private military corporations suffered a severe hit many years ago when the ANC decided to come up with an anti-mercenary law, which meant that you could have been an Mkhonto we Sizwe terrorist and you weren't prosecuted. But if you worked for an NGO delivering food aid to people, you could be prosecuted as a mercenary. And that had an impact on a lot of private security companies because a lot of people came out of South Africa. And so that market isn't as big as it once was. So it's not enough there to help with Afghanistan. You could do something smaller. You could actually have used PMCs in northern Mozambique. That would have actually worked pretty well because the number of people there involved in this nonsense is relatively small. That's the horrific thing about this 4 years. Oh, so Mozambique. A lot of people drawing parallels because they're called locally Al-Shabaab. They're not Al-Shabaab. That's just a nickname that people give them because they don't know what to call them. They claim to be affiliated with the Islamic State. I think that's BS. I'm not buying that. It's not really about Islam. It's not about jihadists. There might be a few of them actually believe in that or faithful in that respect, but this is about power and control. Northern Mozambique has been neglected for centuries. It was neglected by the Portuguese. It's been neglected by Frelimo since it took power, and throughout its civil war with Renamo, and even since '92 when it all ended, they have completely ignored the North. Service delivery is non-existent. The infrastructure is pathetic. And this is fertile ground for people, and there's no rule of law to enforcement because there's very few people up there. The FATM has been up there with over 1,000 troops, and they're afraid to engage because they're cowards. And it took the Dyke group to go in there with a helicopter to save some people back in March when this went down. So northern Mozambique, people need to be very careful about drawing parallels. I've been talking about this on my old program, was censored, not for that reason, but for other reasons. And I talked about this. I had regional experts come in who've been in Mozambique before. I've had academics come in. I've also given my own analysis, multiple videos, and I've repeatedly covered this topic from a South African perspective as well. It's a problem. But that problem in Mozambique could be stamped out in a matter of weeks. And I'll give you one quick parallel, then we'll stop so we move on to some other topics here. In Sierra Leone, that war was horrific, brutal for over a decade. They were chopping the hands off of children. They were giving kids drugs, having them murder their parents, rape their own parents. It was just unbelievable. That went on for a decade while the world watched. In the end, it took an infantry battalion minus from the British Army. Two plus rifle companies went in there and ended that war in 3 weeks. And they've not gone back to war since. There are situations when a professional force, and we could have done the same thing in Liberia and ended that war. It went on for 13 years, but we didn't do it. So in Mozambique, my argument is you can do this with a professional force, Marines or special forces or whoever, go in there and end this thing pretty quickly, because the support is not there for these people. And they are, in many respects, an outside force. Even if some of them are from northern Mozambique, they're an outside ideology. But the problem is, even if you wipe them out, something will come back because the rule of law is not established there, because the government doesn't actually control northern Mozambique, and this will fester and come back again. This thing in northern Mozambique has been going on for 4 years, and I predicted it in 2010, in 2015 again, inside the intelligence community, and then publicly once I became a retiree, and people just ignored it because it doesn't affect them. South Africans are freaking out because Mozambique's next door, but Maputo's next door. Cabo Delgado's not next door. Take a deep breath. You're going to be okay.
Absolutely. And again, that last point is the salient one, the notion of the rule of law. Once you do not have that, it becomes almost impossible at times to reestablish it, because you might send in a force to eliminate those who violate life, liberty, and property for whatever reasons, whether from religious fanaticism or ideology, but whatever. But if you don't have the rule of law, you are screwed. Speaking about being screwed, I'm a little behind on time. I must move on to another issue again, not too far from us here in South Africa, but our Zambian counterparts, still part of the Southern African Development Community, held their elections, and the counting is still underway in that part of the world. Sara, let me come to you, because I know you wrote a piece on this, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, no, you didn't, pardon me, but I know it's something you have been thinking about quite a bit. First things first, the run-up to the elections there. Things like social media being shut down, the internet being shut down, a repression of, the free media, and I use the word free with inverted commas when it comes to Zambia, but I'll be generous. The free media in Zambia, clearly signs of an incumbent who felt the threat of his oppositional leader.
Well, I think Marius is more your man on Zambia, but just to say this one thing.
That's why I sort of.
But just to say one thing is that despite the heavy-handedness of the incumbent, and he's been around since 2015, the results that are coming in at the moment are very significantly for his opponent, and he's done pretty much everything he can do to his opponent over the last few years, but actually kill him. He's imprisoned him. He's done an enormous amount, and it's an indication, I suppose, that the election is being fairly freely and fairly conducted. And secondly, it's a lesson to us that when people want change, they will, if they've got the opportunity to vote for change, they will do so.
And Marius, perhaps let me come to you, and apologies, I know you were someone who had written on this and really just actually raised it, pardon me, with me. The state of things in that country right now, it did seem as though young voters in particular came to the fore and said, what, enough is enough. We need some form of change in Zambia. The economy is in the doldrums. They've just defaulted on a massive loan in that part of the world, and just there's a hunger for change.
And the incumbent Edgar Lungu has been doing some very weird things. He's been he's been a bit of a populist. He's trying to nationalize the copper mines and so on, which Zambia has done before, and then they privatized them and then the economy flipping took off. It skyrocketed when they privatized stuff. Then Edgar Lungu decided to nationalize them, or wanted to nationalize them. But yeah, I think we definitely have to give the Zambians a pat on the back. I saw a tweet actually saying that Edgar Lungu has conceded to his opponent, Hakainde Hichilema. But I'm not sure if that is correct. But from the last reports I saw was that Hichilema was quite far ahead. I think he'd about 60% of the vote that had been counted, and Edgar Lungu was about high 30s, 38% or something like that. So, and this is the third time now, I think, that Zambia will be having a change in government at the ballot box. So it's definitely something that we should admire from the Zambians. But I think what we should look at as South Africans is that the UNIP, the party that was Zambia's only legal party between 1964 and 1991, the United National Independence Party, I think is its full name, it barely gets it doesn't even get 1% of the vote anymore. And this often happens to hegemonic parties. We've seen it happen in Africa. Here in South Africa, we had the National Party that dominated the country for many years. Now it doesn't exist. We had UNIP in Zambia. As soon as it lost power, it doesn't really exist anymore. We had KANU in Kenya. So I think that happens with these hegemonic parties where they're in power for so long, they only exist to be in power. And when they lose, they don't really have, the ANC, there's no real ideology behind in the ANC now anymore. People are in the ANC for, patronage and for, money and whatever. There's no real ideology behind it anymore, not like it used to be. So, and we've seen what's happened to in the Western Cape with the ANC, the only province that's been voted out of power. It used to get nearly 50% of the votes in the Western Cape. Now it gets about 25%. So, and that'll probably happen to the ANC at a national level too, if it does eventually lose power. But I think that's going to be the question, and that'll tell you whether South Africa. That's going to be a big indication whether we're going to be a successful country in the long run or not. Whether the ANC will willingly give up power one day if it loses at the ballot box. Look, we've seen it's given up power at municipal level and at provincial level, but national level is a much different story. So we've got to see what happens. But I think South Africans who are getting a bit sick of ANC rule can just look to see we should take a leaf out the Zambians book and maybe give the ANC a bloody nose at the next election.
Absolutely, and I think that there are parallels to be drawn here, guys. I just want to broaden this conversation a little bit. To look at, firstly, on the one hand, as Marius rightly did, to rope in the record of history around in Africa when it comes to issues of elections and these incumbent type politicians, the liberation movement type politicians, whether they're able to cede power to their opponents. Tariq, I'm going to begin with you just very briefly, please. Marius brings up the issue of South Africans at home, and even as you're speaking, a part of me was wondering: is the ANC the kind of party which would relinquish power when the stakes are actually high? You might say yes, they did so in the Western Cape. The Western Cape is governed by the DA. But we've seen a party here which is at war with itself. And often, the violence that's meted out in politics often isn't between different political parties, but parties internally, and then sort of playing themselves out in a broader political sense.
On what I think, my thoughts on what I think would happen if the ANC were to lose an election. I think the party would really struggle to come to terms with that. And I think if you look at the way that they handled their loss in places like Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela Bay, and Pretoria, they were very much comfortable with resorting to undemocratic behavior just to keep the control over the municipality. So I think if they were to lose, they would have a really difficult time giving power over to another political party. I think the reason why they were willing to concede so easily in the Western Cape is because, luckily for me, my province has a history of rejecting the ANC. So I think they were just more accepting towards it because of the province's culture, political culture.
Koketso, let me come to you because you guys make a huge meal of deriding and making fun of Kedas in the ANC. But one thing I've come to realize, when someone faces the prospect of losing their little patronage network, how they basically eat in inverted commas, those people can become, desperate people like that can become very, very dangerous. And they can start mobilizing almost like warlords various factions to try and destabilize the country. And, if for those who are watching who may be thinking, I'm suggesting, for example, the events of 4 weeks ago, where the country descended into chaos, and we saw factions of the ANC being a part of that. Whether they were the instigators or not is not the point I'm prosecuting, but the fact that they saw this as an opportunity for themselves. One might make the argument that we might see something of that, a South Africa that just won't be able to have a peaceful transition of power from the ANC.
Well, firstly, I'd like to, in my lifetime, actually see the ANC not have a presence in Pretoria, in the Union buildings, that is. And I'm about that, almost at the halfway point in terms of average life expectancy. So I'd really like to see it in my lifetime. But yeah, just to speak to your point about whether we'd see the country descend into chaos should the ANC actually lose an election, I think it is probable. I don't think it's highly probable, however, given the stakeholders at play here, internationally, that is. Of course, given our history with apartheid and the likes, I think there's just too many eyes watching for the ANC to do something stupid. Also considering that they'd want to somehow retain their credibility as potentially a government that came into power off the back of Nelson Mandela principles, and would likely like to leave with the same light. So yeah, I think it's probable, but not highly probable. On a more local level, however, if you look at the different municipalities, etc., I don't think that the ANC is as strong as they'd like to believe. Where I live, and maybe Marius can back me up here, I don't see the ANC actually doing much in terms of campaigning, even around an election. I mean, year in, year out, the Democratic Alliance takes 9/10 of the vote year in, year out, whether it's national, whether it's local government. And so, yeah, should they actually lose the vote at a national level, I think there'd be so much resistance within communities and local communities in particular that I don't see them actually being able to pull off some form of resistance in a tyrannical manner like we've seen liberation movements do in the past.
Chris, I'll come to you in a moment, but I do want to throw it back to Marius, because I think that's a valid point. And as I do that, Marius, I want you to factor in the following, because we're talking about what a transition of power might look like. But the one thing we're forgetting to mention, which we're seeing already, the shoots of at the moment, is the delaying even of the means by which a transition of power happens in any democracy, i.e. the vote. I mean, we're seeing at the moment the Independent Electoral Commission now supported by the ANC as a party, supported by the EFF, the red and tooth and claw commies that they are, and various other political parties, and saying, hey, how about we maybe delay the elections because of, the Delta variant of the virus. That's the reason we're being sold, of course, is the reason that we should see a delay in these elections. A dangerous precedent, Marius, is one that they're asking for here.
I try to back up what Koketso said, because I think he also lives in Edenvale like I do, and I've only seen DA, Freedom Front Plus, and Action SA posters. I haven't seen one ANC poster actually yet, so that tells you something. But yeah, the ANC and the IEC, they want to postpone the election. I'm sure all our listeners and viewers know about it. But there's simply no constitutional mechanism that allows for postponement of the election. The only way you can do it is to change the constitution, and there's no time to change the constitution. There have to be various public hearings and stuff to change constitutions. You can't, and Parliament can't just go vote on it. The Constitutional Court can't just say, we're going to postpone the election. There's absolutely it cannot be done. But at the same time, say okay, we have to worry about COVID and so on. The Moseneke Commission, which recommended that the election be postponed, the medical experts there even said in October, when the election is scheduled for, we're probably going to be at a fairly low level of transmission of COVID. We're going to be in the lulls between the current third wave and the fourth wave if it comes, and if we postpone it to February, if the virus behaves as we've come to expect it, we're most probably going to be, also depending on how vaccination and so on goes in South Africa, we're probably going to be the beginnings of a fourth wave in February. So it makes absolutely no sense. And there's ways we can. So many other countries have held elections during COVID. I mean, we had the US election last year. We had UK local government elections. We had New Zealand went to go vote. I mean, so many countries have gone to go vote. So it makes no sense to postpone the election. And this is really, if it happens, I think that's if it does get postponed, it's a big warning sign for South Africa, and we should be worried. But it does seem, though, I saw Tariq Telane, I think his name is. He's a former commissioner for the IEC, and he was tweeting saying that it cannot happen. The constitutional court cannot postpone it. It's simply the constitution does not allow it. So, and he's a former IEC guy, and he was saying the election most probably, he thinks, is going to go ahead on the 27th of October. The only issue is that there's no registration weekend for the new voters to register. So that's possibly the only issue that could be a problem. But apart from that, it's got to, the election has to go ahead on the 27th of October. There's simply no other option.
Let me go to Sara first, Colonel. I will be with you. Don't worry. I can see you're chomping at the bit here to get in on this one. But Sara, and I'll also throw this one to you, Chris. Sara, talk to me about the hypocrisy here. This is the same ANC, the same EFF, who, when it comes to the political accountability part, i.e., giving voters the opportunity to rate, you know how when those calls end, stay on the line to rate our service after, now we have that opportunity to rate their service via the ballot box, and they're saying, no. Let's delay things, please, to February. Give us some more time to bribe you, to institute a universal basic income grant, or to scare you with COVID and blah, blah, blah. Those same parties, and in the case of the EFF, who are asking for this delay, are the same parties, Sara, who have no problem in coalescing in mass groupings, as we saw, for example, in Phoenix, paying no credence or heed to the supposed danger of COVID-19. Both, by the way, the EFF and the ANC, the EFF having a worse track record of literally having amassed on the Swaziland border, amassed in Pretoria when they went after SAPRA, to demand the Russian vaccines, and of course in Phoenix more recently. It's really the height of irony, isn't it, that they're the ones who then want to delay because of COVID?
No. COVID is a clean, nice, legitimate seeming excuse. The real reason they want to delay is because there've been so many problems. I mean, the unrest is just the cherry on the top of nightmares for the ANC, and they are hoping, because they actually want to have the election next April, they're hoping that by then the effect of the negativity will have subsided and will improve their electoral chances. And I think with the EFF, they've looked fairly desperate. I mean, they're embarking on these absurd, racist rallies that don't begin to meet the requirements of COVID, but you get the feeling that the EFF has sort of lost its traction. It's lost its method of operating. It doesn't actually have a plan for the future that anyone could actually vote for. So I think they're both playing for time. And of course, you've got the problem is there was no guarantee the elections would be postponed. Where's your preparation? They're not prepared, and I think the worst problem for the ANC is that it's an internal elective process for getting potential councillors in place is so convoluted and so potentially violent that they are nowhere near ready for this election, not in months.
Absolutely, and Chris, I must come to here because again, there is a danger here. There is a danger, and there's a record of history, especially across African politics, period, where the incumbent, the one who holds the power, if they sniff any sort of possibility of losing in a substantive way, or even just losing support, they'll try and rewrite the rules.
Well, that's exactly what's happening here. I'm going to have to, after I finish commenting, go through security. So once I finish, I'll drop off, and I get on the other side. I'll try to come back on if you're still on. But I should get through quickly. I've paid for the extra. We're special. Go through that line. So anyway, when I was in uniform, it was special by automatic. Didn't cost me anything. But anyway, so a couple things unpack here very quickly. The ANC is toast in municipal elections. That's why this nonsense is being extended. It's utter nonsense. 118 countries around the world have held elections during the pandemic. Some were delayed, postponed. I've gone to 3 elections in person, didn't wear a mask, didn't get COVID, washed my hands, kept social distancing. 3 elections here in the U.S. It's all bullshit. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the Central African Republic had an election. It's a failed state. They were successful. Somaliland, a country recognized by only 6 other countries, had an election successful. It's bullshit. The ANC knows that they're toast. If an election were held this moment today, the ANC would lose an outright majority, would be DA in Cape Town, in Nelson Mandela Bay, in Shwana, in Johannesburg, because of Herman Mashaba's games. I'm not sure what'll happen. I think it'll be a coalition between the DA and Mashaba's Action SA. And even Durban, which 2 years ago I thought never could fall from ANC hands, they've lost Durban. People are so angry in Durban that a coalition of IFP and DA is likely to take that city. They are toast. There's no way they can win this. Now, as far as these other elections, Zambia, people are, I guess, excited about Hichilema winning. It's great, but people said the same thing about Chakwera in Malawi, and things are going very badly there. We've seen elections change in Zambia for the last 30 years, and I was excited and bought into the change, but there's been very real little substantive change in Zambia, regardless who's ruling. Country has fundamental economic and social problems it needs to address, and refuses to do that. And so until the governments are serious about that, that's not going to change. Malawi, unfortunately, is backpedaling. It was in a better place, but now it's going backwards. Hopefully it won't go too far backwards. But there are examples of these hegemonic liberation era movements that are useless political parties, like SWAPO, who see their disappearing. The November elections in Namibia, another election during pandemic, saw SWAPO have its hat handed to them. They were just wiped out. They don't even control the capital. It's controlled by a coalition of landless people movement and other folks. They don't control almost the major cities in there. They only control rural constituencies, and they're going to lose those next time because of 30 years of service failure, delivery, and corruption. The fish rot scandal is really pissed Namibians off, and we could just go through the hundreds of scandals in South Africa. Now, I did see a comment from News Live Africa and said, you know, part of the free and fair election is political parties get a chance to campaign. Please, I'm not attacking you, brother, but give me a break here. You've had 18 months. I've been campaigning for all the opposition parties in South Africa, not favoring any of them. Obviously, I'm not campaigning for the EFF. You know, the red beret Teletubby wearing guys are not my crowd. But I mean, I've been promoting all opposition parties, telling South Africans vote for anybody other than EFF and ANC, so that you can take back your country from these corrupt vultures that are out there. And I've been doing that for 18 months. And I've said since June of last year, when the first lockdown restrictions were eased a bit, you know, when they were arresting people, were sitting on a beach back last year. Since then, I said, you need to be campaigning now. And you don't even have to work hard. You just put a poster up. So how are those open-toed shoes? Did you like your cooked chicken? Who took those away from you? The ANC. Did it save you from COVID? No, it didn't, because they're morons. You don't have to do any work. They have done all the campaigning for you. So any political party that's not prepared to win an election that's called next Friday doesn't deserve to win the vote. And that's the bottom line.
Well, indeed, that is a bottom line, and rightly said. With that being said, I must mention this. We are at the hour mark here at Liberty and Friends. Welcome to it if you're watching. The numbers have definitely swollen since I last had a look at them. Welcome to every single one of you, but the likes are nowhere near where they should be. Hit that like button right now. Don't be a phantom watcher. Hit that like button. Show me some love, people. It is the only price of admission here at Liberty and Friends as we wrap up your Newsweek. I'm in conversation, of course, with Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa channel. Make sure you check him out on YouTube. Koketso Resane from the Manpatria podcast. Make sure you watch that body of work. It's getting really interesting, especially Dumo's new venture as he looks at topical issues through Austrian economic eyes. Sara, of course, from the Daily Friend publication, and of course the Institute of Race Relations. Tariq Khan from the Freedom Advocacy Network. Have a look at their short videos that they put out every week. I do share them often. And of course, Marius Roodt from the Daily Friend. We're going to move on, guys, to another topic which I think has dominated the news cycle quite a bit. I think Chris probably has to...
I'm going to drop off. I'll go through security. I'll come back if I can, okay? Thank you all so much. And if you didn't like me being on the show, now you can push the like button because I'm leaving.
Shout out to Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa. Hopefully we'll have him back on in a moment. And perhaps let me also keep an eye on the comment section. If you have any questions or comments, guys, we are putting them up on screen. That's how we roll here on Liberty and Friends. We're in the last half hour of the show. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We're going to move on, guys, to another issue which has really dominated the news cycle this week. In fact, the final two issues. And let me begin with the most insipid one, perhaps. The appearance of one Cyril Ramaphosa before the State Inquiry Commission. Goodness gracious me. Can someone be described as dull and all the synonyms associated with that? Marius, I'm going to throw it to you, and then I'm going to go to Tariq. You know, here's a president that just seemingly, Marius, I mean, I don't know how to describe his appearance before that. You know, it's on the one hand, you know, he is the first sitting president to subject himself to a commission of inquiry. You know, and Zondo, you know, he does deserve a little bit of kudos for that, because it was an affirmation of the rule of law in this country, that whether you're king or peasant, the law is supreme. But with that being said, nothing much else of substance in that entire sitting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. You do have to give kudos to the president, but apart from that, that's basically the only thing you can say. And I mean, it's typical. He throws his hands up in the air and says he didn't know anything that was going on. You know, while he was deputy president of the country since 2014, he didn't know. While he was on the NEC of the ANC, I mean, he's been on the NEC, I think, you know, since the 90s. He's never not been on it. So he's always been, you know, right in the heartbeat of the party. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, if he claims he didn't know about all these things that was going on, there's only two possibilities. He's either a fool or he's a liar. It's not possible he didn't know. And if he didn't know about it, what was he doing? He was deputy president of the country, and he was attending ANC National Working Committee meetings and so on, where they were talking about the Guptas and so on. I mean, was he sitting there with his fingers in his ears, or was he, you know, what was going on? So I don't think, and I think that's also probably a reason the ANC doesn't want to go to the polls, because Cyril Ramaphosa's performance at the Zono Commission was not very good, and I don't think he would have got to change many people's minds who were wavering about voting for the ANC when we finally do have an election.
And again, it's a frightening prospect to think about a president who literally, or rather, correction, pardon me, a chap who is President Tariq, spending most of his time on this panel saying, oh, you know, I'm so shocked to hear that. I didn't know that this was happening when a substantive issue is brought to his attention. Or, oh my goodness, cadre deployment is a problem, you say? Man, I didn't know that, you know, choosing people to go into key positions based on their political clout versus their merit is a problem. Who could have foreseen that as a problem, Tariq?
Do you know what? I find it so ridiculous that people seemingly tolerate what I think is a facade on the part of the president. I think he's deliberately creating this facade that he's always shocked, that he's always out of the loop. And I just think it's really pretentious. I often tell my friends that sometimes whenever tourists come to South Africa, they always seem to be shocked at the state of certain things like ESCOM. And it always looks as if Cyril is more shocked than what they are, because of how he always says, I'm shocked at this, I'm shocked at that. And he's been part of the public service for such a long time now. Personally, I don't buy it. And I just think that he needs to start being honest with South Africans. We need to put an end to this false rhetoric of, I'm shocked, I never knew. It's really pretentious.
And Sara, perhaps let me throw it to you, because this is the same guy. And there's a comment on screen just before. I'll get to you, Nebi G. Great question, by the way. This is the same guy who actually headed up the deployment committee of the ANC, who then feigns ignorance completely on how cadre deployment is a policy. And I want us to talk about this policy for a moment. Cadre deployment as a policy by the ANC has perhaps had the single worst effect on governance in the country. It is the corrupter of a public service, whether you believe the state should be a massive bureaucracy or a small one, as I, for example, believe. It cannot operate in any iteration if you're deploying people based on their political clout and their proximity to you as a friend politically versus the best person for the job.
Well, I think the 2 days of questioning were actually revealed in the first session in the morning when Paul Pretorius dealt with the deployment committee, because basically the first thing that we were faced with was the fact that between 2012 and 2017 there were no minutes. Now, basically President admitted there were no minutes. It's not that there had been minutes and they had been destroyed. There pretty much were no minutes. Now, you would have thought, if this were kosher, there would be minutes because it's part of a substantial organization. And I suspect the reason there were no minutes is because in the heart of hearts, they know that you do not fill positions that require competence with distinctly ANC loyalty as the primary criterion for appointment. And I think that essentially summed it up. He tried to say that it was, it was an appointment body and it could only advise, and nonsense. If the deployment committee in the ANC, by very virtue of who they recommend, God help whoever has to make the appointment and doesn't follow the recommendation of the deployment committee. So I actually think it's a sign of, we actually really know this is wrong, but this will protect the ANC and the ANC's march to riches. That's the extent. That's what the only thing that deployment is for.
And this is what really irks me, Koketso, and I'll throw it to you, because often we'll be told by the cadres in particular as they deploy each other, oh no, they'll say, this is not patronage. This has nothing to do with patronage. This is us choosing the best cadres for the job. These are brilliant cadres. And how dare you, Koketso, especially as a black person, how dare you, Koketso, complain? Don't you know that we have to deploy these cadres in order to get rid of white monopoly capital from the echelons of government and society? Your response?
Sure. Yeah. The hard part is actually keeping it nice and concise here. Maybe going back to Nevi G's comment there, because this does tie into the cabinet reshuffle somehow. But part of the common argument that we see, particularly with cabinet appointments, actually deployed cadres en masse, is that we always hear this talk that, these are political appointments, not necessarily, the merit isn't necessarily first and foremost, because it's political. And of course, we want political solutions, or let me say African political solutions to African problems, which is actually nonsense, because nowhere else in the world do people apply such a standard. If you look at, the case of Ministry of Defense, for example, or Department of Defense in the state, etc., we never put an actual army veteran in there or military veteran in there because it's a political appointment. But go anywhere else in the world, or in functioning governments, that is, it's always a military veteran of some sort, someone with actual expertise to succeed in that portfolio. But with cadre deployment, that's not exactly what happens. So going back to now what Sara just mentioned, this whole notion that, during the 5 years there was no meeting minutes and the likes, what I don't like, which is kind of what Cyril was alluding to in his statements, was that this was a unique problem specific to the time of maybe in the run-up to 2017. And that's not true, because all we have to do is go back exactly a year when we look at the National Youth Development Agency, when they had to appoint a new board. What happened there? There were quite capable individuals who actually applied to be part of this key state-owned entity, which is designed to fund youthful enterprise, particularly amongst the black youth and the like. But when it was time for them to appoint a board, they pushed aside the CVs of those who were most qualified. And lo and behold, who did we have on the new board, which was quickly dissolved after much outrage? A long list of cadres. Everyone in there was a cadre of some sort. So this problem never went away, even in 2020/2021. And because it never went away, it's not limited to the shenanigans of the 9 wasted years, or, in the run up to 2017. So the president then coming out and saying that, he is going to make sure that things like this don't happen again is actually him lying. And then on the last point, me as a black person, when I see all of this, it kind of does irritate me a lot, because I want to myself be able to sustain a job and build a career based on my own merit. Quite frankly, I do not feel hampered in any way, much in the same way President Obama didn't feel hampered when he was campaigning and suddenly felt hampered once he was president. But of course, I don't feel hampered in any way. I have my own list of qualifications, unique skills, unique sets of abilities that I have built upon, and I don't need a crutch as a black person to succeed in life. giving that message to people disempowers them so much that it actually causes psychological damage, which is very difficult to get rid of. And the people causing the damage is our very own government. So it's very disappointing. And quite frankly, we should know better even as citizens, because the government is really not your friend.
Let me add to that, because I wanted to actually, I was trumping at the bit to get to this particular point. A policy like cater deployment, to me, I see no difference between it and another condescending policy like, for example, an employment equity or affirmative action, however you want to call it, or a BEE. Because what it does is basically takes the decision making out of who is best for something away from those of us who put in the work to be the best at something, and puts it into the hands of people who make that decision based on nothing more than either my skin color, my genitals, what I have between my legs, or whatever the case may be. And if that is not condescending, if that is not the height of how you should not run a society, then I don't know what else is. Because then it makes me, the best at something, question whether I am the best at it because I was picked on what are other criteria that have nothing to do with where I actually put in the work. So again, we've had this conversation before. Let me come to you, Marius, Sara, and then Tariq, because I think this is a nice little area to zoom in and for a moment. It's a little digression, but it's a good one. It speaks to how I think there are South Africans who are basically beginning to demand that actually, whether it's about a president unable to account for a policy like cater deployment, which picks winners and losers based on their political clout and not their merit, or any of the other political decisions they then take, where winners and losers are picked by anything other than merit, race, or gender, whatever the case may be. There is a rejection of these policies by those who are the victims of them in society, but a political elite who just ignores this, puts the blinkers on, and just forges ahead.
Yeah, and I think one day when the future historians write the story of South Africa, the two biggest mistakes that I think they'll identify the ANC as having made will be cater deployment and black economic empowerment. Because there is no such thing as black economic empowerment in South Africa. I think my colleague Ramaphosa, I think he calls it blatant elite enrichment. And he is completely correct. We've seen, I mean, if black economic empowerment policies worked, we wouldn't have a real black unemployment rate of about 50%. The latest figures from Status A, which looked at inequality, if we look at inequality within race groups, the only race group that saw its inequality increase was black South Africans. And what does that tell you? That means people who already got, who are educated or already have insiders, so to speak, or have links to the government and so on, they're the ones who are benefiting from economic growth and so on. Black South Africans, I mean, so most black South Africans are not benefiting from BE. It's people who connected or whether they were lucky enough to, or they've managed to be educated and so on. But BE doesn't help the guy who washes your window at the traffic light, or the guy who's hustling to make some money to feed his family. BE doesn't help people like that. And that is who needs to be helped. BE should not be about giving somebody who's, Cyril Ramaphosa's third cousin's, auntie, 60 million rand shares on from Goldfields or whatever the case is. That is not true BE. And the only way South Africa will succeed is if we have true BE, and that means that's going to take some hard decisions. And I don't know if the ANC has the cojones to take those decisions.
And so, Sara, this is where it gets interesting for me, because I must reiterate this. So people know exactly where I stand. I'm appalled by policies like BEE and affirmative action, which often claim to be of the benefits of the previously disenfranchised and historically poor black population in this country. Now, that part is true, right? Black South Africans are definitely historically disadvantaged and, on the grand scheme of things, in terms of income, poorer. But a policy like BEE or affirmative action does nothing for those individuals, because if anything, BEE and affirmative action is more primed to benefit those of us within the black community who are elite already, and or have a close relationship with the decision makers of society, i.e. politicians. If you're a friend of a politician, whether you're black, Indian, white, or colored, it's irrelevant. You stand a better chance in this country of benefiting from a policy of like BEE. And then at the same time, and this is where I want you to chime in, because it's a disgusting modern trend, and I'm going to come back to you, Koketso. I don't know if you've noticed it. Those black elites will then, recognizing the failure of the policy for poor Black individuals, then say, well, at least I'm benefiting from the policy and you poor Black individuals can live through me. So as I drive these nice, fancy German sedans and we pop bottles at Cubana and we run up bills of 160,000 Rand per evening, you must be happy, poor Blacks, because I, the rich elite Black who benefits from BEE and I'm able to spend this money, I'm doing it on your behalf. Is there anything more disgusting, Sara, than that?
I think the problem is it sort of goes, it tallies with the ANC's general view of itself, and that is this. I think one of the economists did an estimate that about 30,000 people benefit from BEE. I mean, 30,000 people out of, okay, let's say 30 million adults. It requires too much to break down. The point is that nothing, and it doesn't matter what your previous suffering is not in itself a currency. What becomes a currency starts at the bottom. It's education. It's education. It's decent education. It's education working out. Outcomes cannot be equal simply because people are not identical. But it's that investment at the bottom, and you can't have that investment without allowing the growth of business to allow the growth in jobs. And it's a ratchet effect, and it goes on. The more people that are capable of doing more, the better chance you have of growing the economy. The better chance you have of growing the economy, the better chance you have of improving people's lives. The problem with BE is it stays stuck in a very distinctive, very tiny elite. It does nothing for the growth of the economy, and it does nothing to help people who have been the victims of prejudice and discrimination stop being victims. People are trapped. And the other thing is it doesn't matter what your background, what your color, what your creed, where you come from on earth. Hard work is something that cannot be avoided by anyone in order to achieve, not even the so-called privileged whites.
And Tariq, I must give you the final word here, because I think Sara hits the nail on the head. A system like BE or affirmative action or any of these systems where politicians pick winners and losers actually disincentivizes picking the hard worker as someone who should be at the forefront of helping develop a nation like ours. It cannot be said that, for instance, in a cabinet, let's give it at a most basic level, Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet, it's definitely, if you are able to find any hard workers, but it's definitely not the hard workers who have benefited or who are placed in positions where they can bring benefits to other people. For example, a particular asshat minister has retained his ministry. How is that possible if supposedly BE, again, I'm mixing issues here a little bit, but I'm talking about basically at the most basic level, merit versus the current status quo, where people are picked for arbitrary things as opposed to their merit.
So I think what BEE does insane. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, so thanks. So I think the problem with BEE is that it just perverses the incentives in our society. So now, instead of encouraging people to work hard in order to further themselves, what you're now signaling to people is that they must rather invest in being loyal to some big man in their party, or they must try to entrench themselves in a patronage network. And I think that what we're seeing in the ANC is really just an exaggeration of BEE, where people are just so obsessed over ownership over patronage networks and resources.
Absolutely. Guys, I must move us on to our final issue for the night. Marius, I'll begin with you on this one because you actually responded to the person who we're about to talk about now, and your response was absolutely perfect. One bumbling idiot by the name of Unathi Mthethwa, the Minister of Sports and Recreation in this country. Goodness me. Two things that must be discussed here. Firstly, and both of them are linked, our athletes, who went to Tokyo at the Olympics, these are guys who put in blood, sweat, and tears to try and be the best at their craft. Not the best of results. Only 3 medals coming back between 2 people. But, these are still people who deserve our adulation as South Africans. But did they necessarily receive that from the political head of the sporting codes in this country? Short answer is no. Or there's a mixed congratulatory message by him, where on the one hand, yay for the medals, but boo for your skin color, for having gone to the Olympics. This is, of course, Nati Teto, who took issue with the fact that, quote, the athletes who we sent to Tokyo do not reflect the racial demographics of the country, close quotes. Your response to that, Marius, in the article you wrote?
Yeah, so I read an article that was published on News 24 responding to the minister. And I just made the point that, if the minister said the team's not demographically representative, but what the hell does that even mean? If the team was 80% black, would that be okay? Or what is he actually saying it must be? But anyway, and the fact is, to become an Olympic athlete, you first have to be born with some level of God-given talent, but you also have to then be able to get access to facilities and so on. You could be the best swimmer in the world, but if you don't have access to a pool, that's not really going to help you, is it? But and that's the thing. Out of South Africa's 30,000 public schools, only something like 600 have swimming facilities. Only about a quarter of them even have soccer facilities. Only about 1,000 out of 30,000 schools have cricket facilities and so on. So if the minister wants, our various teams to represent, to reflect the country's demographics, his government's also got to come to the party and make sure that people who want to play sports have the opportunity to do so. And also, I must also say, you don't need to want to one day be in the Olympics or play for the Springboks or the Proteas if you want to play sport. You should be able to just play sport just for the pure love of the game and for all the various benefits from playing sport, from the physical aspects and the friendships you make on the sports field and all that kind of thing. So, and also something with the Olympics is it's easy. The government can say, no, the Proteas or the Springboks have to have 50% of the team has to be black or whatever the case is. They can't do that with the Olympics team because you have to qualify for the Olympics. The government can't say that 50% of all the people who qualify for the Olympics from South Africa have to be black or whatever the case is. So on a final point, the Institute of Race Relations has done some research looking at how people want their sporting teams selected. And the majority of South Africans don't want race to come into it. They want to look at issues like, merit. And on a final point on that, we have seen how transformation has worked in some sports. I think rugby is a very good example of it. Rugby it's a very diverse team. It's led obviously by Siya Kolisi, a black South African, and the team that played, or I'm actually wearing my Springbok jersey today, the team that played against Argentina yesterday, I think was more than half the team was made up of black and coloured players and so on. And they've won the World Cup. They've won the Lions series. They've just beaten Argentina. So transformation also does not mean that there's going to be what's the word I'm looking for? Doesn't mean it's going to be a decrease in standards, but it's got to be done sustainably and it's got to be done at the grassroots, which I think rugby is a very good example of how it worked. So, and I think our other sporting coach should definitely try to take a page out of rugby's book, and especially the way somebody like Rassie Erasmus has led the team. He's a white Afrikaner from Dispatch, but you can see there's he embraces everybody in the team, and you can see how the way the guys speak about him, they all respect him, from Makazola Mapimpi to Dwayne Vermeulen, people from very different backgrounds all respect Rassie Erasmus, and he doesn't look at them. He looks at them as rugby players first, not that Makazola Mapimpi is a rugby player first. He's not a Khoza guy from King Williamstown. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think.
Sorry, Marius, I was just saying, just to add to your point, and I'll let you finish it. But that's the key difference, isn't it? It's the idea that you view someone's excellence first and give that the opportunity, versus saying, no, that's a black guy. Let me give him an opportunity, and we'll just see what happens, whether he's able to meet the cuts or not. That's the key difference. Because we were speaking about this off air, and I was saying, when the Springboks won, there's a lot of the transformationalist types who then saying, oh, it's because this team is black that we're now seeing success and blah, de, blah, de, blah. And that's nonsense, because you're now reducing the fact that there's a black player of excellence on that team to just, his being black is exactly why he's there.
I mean, you don't want to be, I don't want to have a go at Bafana, but I mean, Bafana is just about 100% black and they're quite a useless team. So it's obviously got nothing to do with, the color of the people in the team that does not matter. It depends how good they are. And the Springboks are world class. And, I'm sure only the biggest racists in the world would have looked at Siya Kolisi raising the World Cup, the Webb Ellis Trophy in 2019 and being upset. Same as I'm sure the most mad kind of only like Andile Mkritama would have been upset that that there were some white people in the Springbok team that won or whatever the case is. So most South Africans don't care about that. We just want a successful team. And look, I mean, issues like representation are obviously important. I'm sure that there are lots of, young black guys coming through in cricket now who maybe, if there hadn't been a guy like Mackay and Tini who came in the team 20 years ago, maybe wouldn't have got interested in cricket or whatever the case is. That's obviously not something you can prove. So, but I mean, representation is important. But if you have the grassroots development, that kind of thing will happen anyway. People need to have the opportunity to play whatever game they want to do, whether it's, to be a swimmer or go into athletics or cricket or rugby or hockey or whatever the case is. People need to have the opportunity to play the games, and then their money must also, and sorry, on a final point, I think Australia and UK are two countries you can look at where they have really invested in their Olympic athletes. And they've come out and they've created various institutes. The Australian Institute of Sport is a leading example of that, where after the 1976 Olympics, Australia did very badly. They only won 5 medals, I think. They established the Australian Institute of Sport, and now they are an Olympic superpower. And they only got 20 million people, but they still come in the top 10 medal tables. And there's also a correlation between your economic development and how well you do at the Olympics. So it's also an issue. We need to get the economy growing. That's what Natia Mteto must sit in the cabinet meeting and say, look, guys, we want a representative Olympics team. Then we need to get the economy growing at 5% a year, and we need to get rid of things like BE, etc. But we all know that's not going to happen.
And Koketso, I must throw it to you briefly, guys. I'll come to you just now, Sara and Tariq, and I see the Colonel has joined us again. Let me please add him to the stream for a moment. Koketso, let me come to you because there's a little bit of a disagreement I have with Marius, or rather a nuance. Let me put it that way. I have when it comes to the issue of representativity. I don't feel represented just because I see a black individual on the field. And Marius, I'm not saying that's the argument you're making, but rather I feel more represented if his story around the very things that make him who he is, his background, where he comes from, his culture, his values, blah, blah, blah. That's closer to being something I feel represents me when I then see him or her being at the pinnacle of their sport. Let me be precise and specific. I went to what were considered B-rate schools when it comes to the prowess of our rugby. I went to Hillcrest High School, and a school very close to us who we have a derby-esque rivalry every year is Kloof High School. And I felt more represented when I saw a chap named BJ Buerta play for the Springboks as a prop, because he went to Kloof High School. The very sort of schools that you'd never think would be able to produce a Springbok. I feel more represented when I see a chap who used to be my head boy when I joined Hillcrest High School in the year 2000, Stuart Berry, who's now an internationally recognized rugby referee. Those chaps, I look at and I go, wow, if they were able to make it, then by heck, black, white, Indian, colored, it's irrelevant. I can make it too.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to agree with you there. So I was in school with Akani Simbina a couple of years ahead of him, but we all knew even then that this guy can run. So when I see him at the Olympics, shout out to him, he just missed out on bronze. So when I see him at the Olympics, I'm not thinking, hey, there's a black guy who looks like me who's at the Olympics. I'm thinking of it more as this is a guy I used to laugh with in school occasionally and who could run faster than me when I was in matric and he was a few years behind. But I digress. 2 things, and I'll be very quick with these as well. So the first thing here is notice how there's a lot of silence from the types people like the EFF, for example, when it comes to particular sporting codes. And that just shows that it does kind of show evidence that they probably don't know much about the sporting code, which speaks into, as Marius was saying, that there is actually not much development at the grassroots level. So you won't hear them say anything about tennis or golf because they actually don't know tennis or golf. And that's not a fault on their part. It's because of the system that we're currently in. Second thing, and I used to debate this back in high school. My history teacher, Mrs. Brenda Kleinstra, can attest to this. Even my debating coach from high school, Mrs. Denise Duo-Philippe, can attest to this as well. it takes a few years before you can recognize the talent in somebody. And because of where we're in, I went to what would be considered a former Model C school. And it was always going to take at least 20 years or so for real talent, or let me say black talent, to come out of those systems and actually potentially represent the country at the biggest stage. This means then that in the year 2000, 2002, you're not going to find a lot of black players in the national rugby team because they actually don't exist. There can be rarities here and there, but because they don't exist, don't expect them to exist and don't force the issue. Now we're sitting in 2021 where we've had that 20, 30 years of such players having gone through the sporting code at a young age, having played these sports at a schooling level and having realized their potential and actually being in the starting lineup with people who were typically in the same school, your Hillcrest and the likes. And they're there because of their merit. They're not there because they happen to be black. They're there because just like the white person next to them, they've also been playing the sport for years. They've also received accolades, and now they're in the national team and achieving excellence. I've been saying this since around 2006, and it sounded radical back then. I don't know if it sounds radical now, but that's literally all we needed. We just needed to give time where necessary for people to actually realize their talents, and they'll do us proud in the future. It's a pity that we are in that future now, and you've got people like Minister Natim Mthethwa who are actually racializing the issue instead of actually checking themselves and looking in the mirror and realizing that they as ministers are perfectly positioned to do something about it, instead of you or I or someone like Tatiana Schoonmaker, who is just an individual but happens to be an overachiever and also happened to break the world record at the Tokyo Olympics.
Absolutely. I just want to bring Chris in just in the loop so he knows what we're talking about here. We're basically looking at the comments that were made by the Minister of Sports in this country when our athletes returned back from the Tokyo Olympics, where he, instead of just congratulating and leaving at that, he then goes into a bit of a tirade, chastising the fact that the racial makeup of the team that went to the Olympics doesn't represent the racial makeup of the South African population. A completely asinine comment, really. And let me just go to Sara, and then I'll come to Tariq, and then you, Chris, because there is something to be said here. I mean, unfortunately for you in particular, Chris, you're seeing this rhetoric bubble up in America in terms of the racial bean counting and really the sort of woke-esque approach to dealing with all things in a society. Sorry, let me come to you because Koketso makes a critical point here. He's the minister. He actually marshals state resources that are aimed to achieve the very sort of thing that he claims he's trying to achieve, which is to see more black individuals in the elite echelons of various sporting codes. But I can take you now to a school that is, or maybe I shouldn't say this because there's a few crazies out here who follow me and threaten me and send threats. So they may not maybe say where I live, but except to say in my township of Mlazi, these are schools that have a long track record. They've been around for, since 19 Footsack, so to speak, but their sporting facilities are nowhere near what I would experience as someone who went to Hillcrest High School. Yet we're expecting that school to produce a Olympic swimmer. We're expecting that school to produce someone who can play SA hockey, etc., etc. He's almost pointing, as he points fingers at others, four are pointing back at him.
I think the problem with Natim Mthethwa, I mean, other than not being bright, is he doesn't actually understand what it means to excel at sport and to be accepted by a fan base as somebody you want to watch and support. He certainly doesn't understand that the whole issue of qualifying for an Olympics. And you can't sort of start sort of in the middle and hope that you're going to get somebody to the top. It has to start at the bottom. So there are going to be a lot of disadvantaged youngsters until such time as things like facilities and coaching and identification of talent really becomes a much more widespread issue. But just to come on to just to go back to when Tatiana Schoonmaker came back to the athletes' village, the reception she got was from South Africans of all color, all creeds, all races. She represented them, and they were showing their appreciation. And there wasn't, frankly, a dry eye in the house. And it must be I would have thought it'd be a huge insult to those black athletes who made it to the Olympics to be told by their minister that we need more black athletes. In other words, it's a bean counting exercise. Your talent at the end of the day stands for nothing.
And I must take that step. I must take it one step further. And Chris, I'll bring you in, and then Tariq. South Africans love their athletes. It's a love affair that we've had even during the apartheid days. Ironically enough, before the transition into this democracy, one of the first Olympic athletes I can think of, whose name was plastered on taxis all over my township, was Uzola Bad. A young lady who ran barefoot. I think she competed in the '92 Olympics, if I'm not mistaken. And you would never hear anybody speak ill of Uzola Bad. And in fact, as I said, taxis were named after her because of their speed and endurance, for example. But when you then look at the political elites in our country, their rhetoric almost doesn't match what ordinary people think about their athletes. Let me be precise and specific. When the Springboks, for example, were beginning to see success, there are still politicians in this country who are chastising the fact that there are white players in the Springboks. How dare the Springboks not look like South Africa, for example, in the racial beam set of 80% black, 9% white, blah 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 blah, which is exactly what the transformationalists, that's why I don't like that word, actually mean when they talk about transformation. Chris, and then Tariq.
All right. So the problem we have here, of course, is that you're in the water. You're waded into the water with the race merchants. This is all this nonsense is. Let's get a few facts on the table. The reality is, when it comes to high performance in athletics, it comes down to culture, opportunity, and resources. And that's the bottom line. I mean, I could have been a world-class swimmer, except I lived in Appalachia. We didn't have a pool within 35 miles, 50 kilometers. So there you go. Is that because I'm white and they discriminate? No, it's because that wasn't a priority. Feeding your family is a priority. It was a much bigger thing. I'd like to see black South Africans achieve 70, 80, 90% on their matrix, not 30% that the ANC expects of South Africans. That'd be a lot more important to me than seeing more sprinters in the Olympics. That'd be nice to see. But here's the bottom line. In the United States, 65% of the National Football League are black players. 78% of the NBA are black players. Yet blacks only make up 13.5% of our population. So hold on. If we have to be representative, that's a bit overrepresented, isn't it? And the point is, I don't care. I care about performance, and I care about exceptionalism. And that's the bottom line. The reason why the NBA is mostly black is because it's a cultural thing. That doesn't mean white guys don't play basketball. It just means that the style of basketball that's popular in the NBA is one that the coaches, the teams, they draft players who are a certain style, and that's what they want to put on the court. And that's why it's become almost entirely black league. But nobody says anything about that. There's nothing said about it. With the Springboks, I don't care if the Springboks are all white, if they're all colored, if they're all black. I really don't care. I just want to see the best team out there. And Rossi Erasmus didn't pick the best team. He picked the best team that fit within the racist standards that he was forced to use. That's what happened to him last time. He picked the team that was a team and not a team based on color. It's really irritating and frustrating. Tatiana Schoonmaker, 2 minutes, 18.95 seconds. She not only set the world record, she blew it away. I mean, South Africans should be dancing in the streets like when the Springboks won. That is a world record in the Olympics. That's amazing. And I heard this speech when she came back. I actually did a little clip on it and put it on another platform because I figured it wouldn't be safe on YouTube, in which I pointed out that instead of talking about her glory, the guy launched right into transformation. Who gives a flying flip? What sec? Piss off. Hit the road, buddy. We don't care about your transformation. It's utter nonsense. We care about exceptionalism. And you can't fake exceptionalism with quotas. You can only get exceptionalism by investing and creating the talent you have, regardless of where they come from. And it starts at the school level. This is why Sara is an abject failure. Unlike Marius there, I think said something about the getting in the sport early, that the rugby, Sara has done it well, was the implication. I disagree. They still are not in the schools. Most young South African kids of any color don't have access to proper rugby pitches, equipment, and it's not something inculcated in them. And that's why, to this day, the majority of Springboks have been coming from a small number of feeder schools where they've traditionally come from. From schools, the varsity level. That's where they've been coming from for years. You got guys who are exceptions to that, like Peter Steph du Toit. He's a white guy, but he comes from a non-traditional small school, and he still made it. That was unusual. And it's not a question of race. It's a question of who goes to schools. Khaleesi went to one of the feeder schools, and he made it. So stop the race mercantilism. Let's talk about the reality. Here's one more thing, and then I'll stop because this is going on. I get on a platform here. The Proteas have a lot of Indians on it. I don't care. That's a cultural thing. Cricket is big in the Indian community. It's been that way since the Brits introduced it in the subcontinent. So if South African Indians want to play cricket and they're good at it, more on them. I don't care. Let's get rid of these race mergers. This guy who's your sports minister, oh my gosh, this guy's got the intellectual capacity of a barn swallow. That's the bottom line. He's really out in left field. And I won't say much more than that because I don't want to, but anyway, and then people know my position on sports ministers. When a country has to have a sports minister, it's already over. This should be done for the private sector and done in schools. And there you go. There's my piece on it. I hate race merchants. They're all over in control of the world right now, and they're destroying us.
You and I both, Chris. And Tariq, let me give you the final word because Chris makes an important point, and we'll actually cap off the topic with you. You know, an aversion to excellence. That's what we're actually seeing here. When someone has to fall back on race and all things being counted through the lens of race and racialism, it really is an aversion to excellence, is it not?
I think that it is. Oh, can you hear me now? I didn't know what's wrong with the speaker today. I wanted to say, I think that it is an aversion to excellence. As I stated earlier, it's all about trying to create a patronage network where you try and control that other person for your own political purposes.
Absolutely. Guys, with that being said, I must say thank you. We ran a little bit over time, about 15 minutes over time, but it's irrelevant. The show is the only long format show that I have. If you're watching and you love the show, please hit that like button. I'm going to give everybody just a final say insofar as how you can reach them on their social media platforms. Chris, I'll begin with you only because you've got a bit of time pressures around you right now. How do the folks find you, Chris?
Well, thanks. See, my flight looks like it's delayed a little bit, so I got a connection. Hopefully, I'll still make it. But yeah, thank you for letting me go first. So my reconstituted channel is Chris Wyatt Africa. The old one's just Chris Wyatt. So you can find me Chris Wyatt Africa on YouTube. If you want to hear more salty commentary, go to Odyssey. That's where I actually speak things that I'm afraid of being censored on YouTube for. And then also have the All Things Africa podcast on Podbean, All Things Africa. And we do a live program there, plus all the coverage I do. So basically these days, most of where people can find me is there. I'm on the radio in the States, but unless you want to listen on the internet, it's not really going to help people. But you can find me on Chris Wyatt Africa on YouTube for now. And if I get censored again, then I'll be elsewhere.
Absolutely, brother. Good to have you on the show. And thank you very much for having joined us. Sara, how do the folks find you? What are you going to be looking at in the week ahead?
Okay. What I'll be looking at in the week ahead is the climate change report of the UN. And you'll gather from our tone that it will not be favorable. So we'll be looking at that and a whole range of other things, including the ongoing issue of the election. I'm also kind of wondering how the Zondo Commission is going to put together its actual report at this stage, now that it's finally come to a close. I'm not so whatever with social media. You best to go onto the sites I'm involved in, which is dailyfriend.co.za and edonti, edonti.org, which is a site dealing with advice on critical race theory for parents for schools.
Absolutely. Super important issue that we will traverse here on Liberty and Friends and indeed the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Thank you very much. That's Sara Gunn, of course. Koketso Puti, how do the folks find you? And what are you guys going to be talking about on the Manpatria Show?
Okay. How do you find me? Well, name, surname on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to find me. So yeah, DM's open. So yeah, I'm open for coffee with anyone. And I really mean that. And I have had these coffees with multiple people. As for what's coming up on my Patreon, there's always the podcast, which comes out every Monday at 7 p.m. So check that out on YouTube. We record on Fridays, but you get to watch it on Mondays. And then, you just have to deal with three black guys who, don't speak political English. That comes to that.
Shout out to you guys, man. Shout out to you guys out in Manpatria. And Dumo, if you're watching, brother, it would be nice to have you on. Tariq, how do the folks find you, homie? What's your social media? And how do they get in touch with the fan, guys? Or see fan content?
So the viewers can get in touch with me over Instagram and Facebook. My name is Tariq. And then in order to reach out to the Freedom Advocacy Network, they can just search for our name on Google. we don't have a lot of other NGOs that share the same name as us. So it won't be really difficult to find us over the internet.
Excellento. That is, of course, Tariq Khan from the Freedom Advocacy Network. Last but not least, Marius, how do the folks find you? And, of course, what will you be looking at in the week ahead? You're muted, Marius.
Yeah, sorry, I see I'm muted. Yeah, so things I'll be looking at will be the aftermath of the Zambian election, I think, and what lessons got for South Africa, and then the Constitutional Court hearing on Friday, where it's going to be decided whether the election is going to go ahead on the 27th of October or not. And I think that is going to be one of the most important court judgments in post-apartheid South Africa. So it's definitely something to watch. And if people want to find me, they can go read the stuff that some of my writing. Sara also is on there, dailyfriend.co.za. Also follow the Daily Friend on Twitter if you like, Daily Friend SA. You can also follow me. My handle is Marius C. Roodt, and also Daily Friends also on Facebook. So just look for Daily Friend if you want to follow on Facebook.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And a big thanks to all of my guests as I get them off screen. And a big thanks to you, dear viewer, for watching the show. This has been another episode of Liberty and Friends. Please hit that like button on your way out. And of course, hey, man, don't forget, share this stream. If you're watching on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, the show being simulcast on all three platforms. Shout out to all of my moderators on YouTube. Thank you, guys. You make the comment section much more livelier than usual. If you want to support the show and support the work of Big Daddy Liberty as we gear towards ramping up the Mazakele campaign, hopefully be at the same time as the local government elections, because I want to go toe-to-toe with the politicians as they hit communities spreading their poison to South Africans. I also want to be able to hit the ground running, go community to community to spread my ideas of liberty, a market economy, a non-racial society, and of course, that faith, flag, family, and freedom type ethos. So you are instrumental in supporting that. You can donate $50 or $2 a month to that cause. All of that information is in the descriptor of the video. Thanks for watching. This has been another episode of Liberty and Friends. I'll see you on Wednesday for the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I hope to have Tim Noakes, Professor Tim Noakes, on the show. He'll chat to us about nutrition and health and the particular approach he advocates for, especially because it's instrumental in where I'm at in terms of getting my own health and beating obesity. So we're going to have that conversation hopefully on Wednesday. I'll just have to confirm it with the good prof. Thanks for watching. Be ever wonderful. And remember, never trust a commie.